Welcome to Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose. I'm Deremy Dove, and I'm joined by my tag team partner, the hardest working man in show business, Mr. Jose Ruiz. What's going on, man?
Deremy Dove, what's up, dude? How you doing, man? It's good to be here, man. It's good to see you. It's always good to be here with you, man.
Yeah, man. So this is our first episode. We had a little summer break. Um, we're working people, like
Yeah,
obviously
hell
with
yeah.
this, but with everything, else, we have other jobs and everything going on. So we had a little summer break from the show, but we appreciate Bigger Than the Game Nation still listening, still supporting us while we had our summer break, and we're back and we're excited to give this episode. And Jose, this is one that you were more excited than I was to talk
Yeah,
about this, and it's crazy that August 12th will be 30 years since, and that was the start of the '94 baseball strike.
yeah. That is insane to me. When you hear them dates and stuff like that, and how long ago that was, it just reminds me. I'm definitely old. I'm not old, but I'm getting old. But no, man, like that '94 season, man. Like obviously, what people remember it is for the baseball strike and everything that happened afterwards, and how baseball suffered after all of that. And what brought it back was '98 and that home run chase and all that. But what people kind of forget sometimes, man, like that season itself it was becoming a very, very good season, and just historically there was a lot of stuff going on. And we'll get into some of that stuff, like Tony Gwynn and what he was doing and things like that. But what I remember that season the most, Jeremy, and I think you do too, it's that 1994 Montreal Expos team, and that the season that they were having, and en route to possibly a World Series trip, and maybe a championship for Montreal Expos, and how that got taken away from them, man. And even I was not an Expo fan. You were not an Expo fan, even though you got the nice hat on there, me.
Mm-hmm.
But even I felt like, man, like that's so messed up for that team, man. And that's why this team, again, I think it needs to be talked about a lot more. And we're definitely here to do that at Bigger Than the Game.
No, absolutely, and we're definitely looking at the '94 Expos, and I think they go. It's intertwined the '94 Expos and that baseball strike because you can look at the other sports have had lockouts,
Right.
but it's so weird because this is one that's so easy to point. You can look at the struggles of baseball 30 years later, and you can go right back to that '94 baseball strike. And I think it just shows you how crazy it is that, time's of the essence. You can be on top and you think the sport's going great. I mean, you look at baseball, the '93 World Series, which is painful for us as
Yeah.
being from Philly, but you end it on a great high of like exciting Joe Carter's home run. It was an exciting series, back-to-back champs. The '94 season kicks in. People are going to the games. Football is definitely the number one sport, but baseball is still popular. And like you said, all these historic things are happening. Matt Williams and Griffey are chasing Roger
Yeah.
Maris, 61 home run record. Tony Gwynn's floating with 400. The Yankees, and they did bounce back, obviously, the next year, '95, and we all know what happened later in the decade of the '90s, but the Yankees were looking to come back, and that was going to be their first postseason appearance in 13 years. So all these things were happening, but the number one story always, those Montreal Expos, man. And Jose, just why do you think that it's something that, man, the first thing with this historic strike that really took America's pastime down, the first thing we talk about is the '94 Expos?
Because I mean, they were, like I said, they were en route to a possible World Series, appearance, and possibly a championship, man. And then also me as a fan at that time, I was young, but I was a diehard baseball fan, and I'm sure you were too, Jeremy. And I knew that team was not going to be able to stay together for a long time. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, so in my mind, I was like, this was the shot. Like '94 was the shot, and it was, and that's exactly what happened. And even '93, that incredible run they had, August, September, and they almost spoiled it for the Phillies. They finished 3 games back of the Phillies. I think they went like, it was a crazy number. It was like 30 and like 7 or something like that. And those last 40 games or whatever amount of games it was just an insane number. And watching, and that's kind of, for me, that's where I just started at. It was like, man, watching them and watching that team develop and what it turned into at the end of 93. And you're like, wow, like this team's going to be something good, and that's exactly what it was. And that's how they started. And then they went on another crazy run in the 94 season. I think they were like 40 and 18 after June or some crazy number like that, man. And it's like they have all these young, great players. And as a fan, I knew like this wasn't going to last long. This was the season where they were going to be able to put it all together, and they did. And it was just pulled right from under them, man.
One thing that's interesting to me is, and I think that's why I totally get why, like from what you just said, that the Expos are remembered, but for the first thing, I think it surprises me because they weren't one of those flagship type franchises. Or if I compare it to another sport, the Seattle Sonics in basketball weren't a flagship franchise, but they were a cool franchise. And there was
Right.
even like, the fan base in Seattle, but then other people liked Seattle. They liked to watch the team. They liked the jerseys, all these things. The Expos were kind of like this cult, like whatever team, I felt like throughout all this time, all those years that I watched them. But then it's just like these past 20 years since they've been gone from Montreal, it's like all these Expo fans. And maybe I'm crazy, Jose. Tell me. A little bit of me is like, where were y'all then? And I know there's some people in Montreal and stuff, but it wasn't a booming franchise. Like, you know
Right.
what I mean? I think that's what kind of gets me.
No, and I agree with that. And they left for a reason, right? Like we can always point to a lot of that stuff. And, I know they were not a good team for a while there, for a long time there, and then, they started to get all these players and, they turned into what we were talking about here today. But you're right. Like if there was, I know a lot goes into like the support piece. Like I know, like, there's a great documentary. I think MLB Network did it. And, they talk about Montreal Stadium and all that, like how that was like a big proponent for that, and how like that it was just not a good place to play baseball, and a lot of things go into that. But I agree. No, I'm not. I don't think you're crazy at all, Deremy. I agree with you 100%. Like, where were all these Expo fans, all these dudes wearing these hats like Deremy's wearing today, and like where were they at? Like, and they were not around because I didn't know any Expo fans growing up. You know what I mean? When the team was there, even when they were winning a little bit, they was probably 4th or 5th place for a while. Nobody really talked about them, until the end of 93 or even 93, like the middle after post like All-Star break. People started really to talk about like the talent they had there, number one. But then, you know, 94, everybody was talking about them. And then 95, everybody was talking about them because obviously it's a big fall off. So I know in the early 80s, but I was too young for all that. You know what I mean? Like I think it was the
Yeah.
early 80s with Lance Parrish and, a bunch of those other guys. They had a really good team then, but I was way too young for that. So even that team's, I don't hear nobody talking about those teams either. So, I just knew Gary Carter came from there. That was it.
Yeah.
Like,
And
so
the Hawk.
yeah, and the Hawk, absolutely. So yeah. So I don't know. I agree with that though.
No, I just think that's why, because the 94 strike, the aftermath, the effects of it, I think, you have why baseball pushed the home run derby. I mean, not the home run derby, but the home run boom of 98 and it was steroid. Like all of that is, you can look at, man, the after effects of what happened in 94 and how, man, the fans were letting the owners, the players know that they're pissed. And it does surprise me a little bit that isn't the first thing talked about with this strike. Everywhere you look now is these Montreal Expos. That's what happened. And I look at this team, and this is one that I will give it, and I do remember this team. I know you do too. It was a lot of not just like great talent on the team, because I think a lot of times in sports you can have great talent and teams are winning, and winning is exciting in general. But it doesn't mean like it's exciting product either. Like you're happy they're winning if you're a fan, but you don't always get exciting on the field or on the court. These Expos had great talent and they were exciting to watch, man. They were a fun baseball team to watch.
Right. They did everything well. You know what I'm saying? Like, and as a fan, they had good pitching. I wouldn't call it. I mean, we're going to talk about Pedro and all these guys, but I wouldn't call it. Statistically, they were comparable to the Braves this season. You know what I mean? But we all know, like, they were not, the Braves in that rotation, but they were having a great season, but they can hit for power. They had tremendous speed. They played great defense. It was just like, you're right. It was such an exciting brand. It was almost like if baseball could do a fast break type of offense, that was these guys. Guys were putting up great numbers. We're going to get into like the talent they had, but I think it's always exciting when it's a young team. You know what I mean? Like, and all these players that we're going to talk about in today's episode, they were all young, like just starting to really not even hit their prime yet. And then we, as fans, you're like, man, like if that team could have stayed together for another 5 or 6 years, man, it would have been tremendous baseball to see.
By far the youngest team in baseball that year. And I think it's just impressive just to see what they had. And one thing you could give the Expos franchise throughout, they did find talent. They knew how to like scout, like throughout like you could look at from when they first became a franchise all the way up to the end. They knew how to get talent. I mean, that was probably the one thing toward those latter years. If the Expos were playing, it's like, oh, they got Vlad Guerrero. Like they, even then, like they knew. We mentioned Gary Carter and Dawson and Tim Raines, like, and that's in the '80s. And then you look at, I mean, that outfield, man, what an outfield! And that's what jumps out to me, Jose. Like first is you have Moises Alou, Marquise Grissom, and the Hall of Famer Larry Walker in that outfield. That's for that 1 year. That it's tough to beat that outfield.
I was thinking that. I was like, man, like I was thinking earlier, I was out, I went for a run and stuff, and I was like thinking about the show. And I was like, even like for a young outfield, I can't remember a better one. Like you can look at what Seattle was doing. They had Griffey, Jay Buhner, but Jay Buhner wasn't a young player. And that was not comparable. Cleveland at this time had a pretty good outfield, Kenny Lofton. Like that wasn't comparable. Like it was just all three of these guys were 5'2" players. You know what I mean? Like maybe Grissom wasn't hitting 30 or 40 home runs, but he was hitting 20 plus. You know what I mean? Like and stealing 60 bases and Gold Glove center field. Like each of them were all good, man. All 5'2" players. And again, I honestly like why I think about this team because I got robbed. You know what I mean? As a baseball fan of like such a great young team, man. And again, you started to see the year after, some of them guys started to depart, and but they were all great, man. Like they were all great players, and you saw they left Montreal and had great careers.
Yeah.
And,
no, and to your point, and that's what hit me was offensively, you probably have other outfields, but all three of these guys were great defensive players too.
Yeah, Larry Walker had one of the best arms I've ever seen in
absolutely,
right field.
Absolutely. You could put him up there for outfield arm. He's in the top 10.
Yeah,
I mean, he had a cannon. Marquise Grissom, that speed, how great he was defensively. And, Moises Alou, I feel like the whole Steve Bartman thing, people think about that. But he was a heck of a baseball player too.
Yeah.
An all-star level guy and as well. So, there's a lot of other things that jump out, a lot of other talent, but I kind of go to that outfield because I feel like in a perfect world, your foundation is those three guys. Like that's who,
right.
If everything would have went and all the stuff that we're talking about didn't happen, that's the core of my team is those three.
Yeah, and if you got that locked down for years and years, like they just had it, like they had it in 94, 93, 94, then you were good to go. And now you had to just figure out pitching. And, when you got an outfield that's defensive, like that's great defensively like that, you can win with Dennis Martinez. You can win with guys like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that they don't have to be Greg Maddux and Tom Glavine and Smoltz. Like, you can win with just average pitching because they're going to get all these fly balls. They're going to get in the gas. They're going to do all of that stuff. So, yeah, I thought about it long and hard, and I was like, man, like in outfield, like development, whatever, however you want to put it, man, this one is tough to beat.
Yeah, it really is. And, you also have to look at, you have a young Cliff Floyd.
I know. Insane, man. It's crazy.
Will Cordero was an all-star that year.
He was an all-star, yeah.
And then I think what's huge is them trading Delano DeShields.
Another good young player.
Yes. And for this young, skinny, right-handed pitcher, and the
Jerry
Expos,
Curl.
yeah, with a curl, and the Expos at the time were crucified for making this move. How do you get rid of one of your young players like that? After, to your point, you pushed, you had this great run, you won over 90 games, and almost, if there was a wild card, well, no, the
Oh,
Braves, well, the
yeah, the Bray.
Giants would have gotten that.
Yeah, because the Giants had 100 wins.
Yeah, but in today's game with all these wild cards, they would have been in '93, but at that point, no, because the Giants won 103 games, which is crazy, but
I know.
which is insane. Like I said, these had these great, exciting years, and then you have this strike. But you look at what happened; they make that trade for this guy named Pedro Martinez, and Tommy Lasorda, the Dodgers were like, he's too skinny, he can't last. It's one of the worst, maybe the worst trade in Dodger history wound up happening here.
Yeah.
But at the time, everyone thought that the Expos were crazy. And I think that's just what happened. And that's the shame of it. They had some shrewd scouts and shrewd executives who were making some good moves for this team.
Yeah, I mean, because and just for context, like the reason why people were so upset is Delano DeShields was a really good second baseman, a young, up and coming second baseman, and they had Delano DeShields leading off, I believe, or it might have been vice versa, and Marquise Grissom, those 1 and 2 guys, man, and it was like if they got on base, they were still in second. They were going to move them more. It was just they were always on base and creating havoc for pitchers, man, and it really was working for them, Deremy, like we were talking about, like at the end of '93, like and fans again were really excited about this team, and but then we talk about Pedro, and you know how I feel about Pedro, man, and I love Pedro Martinez to death, man, and it's just that trade again, like not only put Pedro on the map, obviously, right? Because he transformed in Montreal. Because what Pedro was at the time is not what he was later on in his career. Like
Right.
Pedro was a young, while he had a lot of heat, he was one of those guys that was throwing 95 plus at a time that not a lot of guys were doing that. But he was really wild, man. And the key component, I think, in all of this stuff that we can talk about too, Jeremy, is Felipe Alou, man, like, what I'm saying? Like, and he knew Pedro from like the summer leagues down in Puerto Rico and things like that. And, once Pedro came over, he taught Pedro that 4-seam fastball. He adjusted how he, gripped the ball. And it was lights out for Pedro after that. You know what I'm saying? And Pedro says it all the time. Like I saw him in an interview in the MLB Network when it might have been Fox, but wherever, one of those episodes shows that he's on all the time. And he said it. I give all the credit to, Felipe Alou that for changing how I grip the ball. That changed everything for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and Felipe Alou was longtime manager for the Expos and someone respected in the game. And I feel if anyone kind of got robbed, for the '94 Expos, I feel him, because if they have a great run and say to get to the World Series or win the World Series, he gets more of that due, because he talked about one of the great baseball minds and great baseball teachers ever. What they had with Felipe Alou, Moises Alou's dad, so his son
Right.
is in the outfield, but hey, his son was an all-star level player. But absolutely, like, I don't think you could give me. There's very few skippers at that time, and there's some great skippers who were managing at that time.
Yeah.
But there's not too many who I would want to coach the youngest team in baseball more than Felipe Alou.
Yeah, he just looked like a great coach. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and again, I think the part that a lot of people leave out, you know what I'm saying, is his understanding of this up and coming rise of talent that's coming out of the Dominican Republic, that's coming out of Puerto Rico, that's coming out of, Cuba at the time. Well, I know they weren't like a lot of the guys coming out of Cuba, but just all that talent. He was knee deep in that talent in the summer leagues, and he knew all those guys. And so it was easy for him to, like, one, build relationships with those guys, but two, give information to his GM. Like, look, I've seen this guy, I've coached this guy. He's going to be a really good player, man. And I think that move for Pedro and him knowing Pedro the way he did, it made sense to me, like why his career took off when he got to Montreal.
And it really did. I mean, Pedro leading, up until when, August 12th is when they stopped, but, led the team with 142 strikeouts. He was 11-5, had 144 innings pitched in 24 games. And with a good staff, Ken Hill was a good player. He was an all-star
Yeah,
that year.
he was going to win over 20 games that
Yeah,
year.
he was fighting for Cy Young.
Yeah.
Honestly, that year, so like that staff was really, that starting pitching was really good. And like you said earlier, for that year was going to match the Braves. Now we know legacy wise, only Pedro
Yeah.
matches them, but in '94 they were ready to go toe to toe with one of the great pitching staffs in baseball history, those '90s Braves. So I mean, this was a loaded team.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think they led the league in ERA, and I think starter wins, walks, and walks, not that they had the most walks, but the least walks of any team. And that's with Pedro, you know what I'm saying? So that just goes to show you. And then, you had that great starting pitching. Well, this year it was great starting pitching. And then, you get to the sixth, seventh inning, and then things are done. Like, you're not, once you get to Mel Rojas, John Wetland, a young John Wetland throwing 97 again at a time where not a lot of guys were doing that. It was over. So these starters were pitching 6, 7 innings, and then they were turning it over to this great bullpen. And it was just, again, like how teams are built today. Like good starting pitching, give you 5 or 6 innings. You got a bullpen guys pitch to 6 or 7, and then you have your two guys at the end that are going to shut everything down. And that's exactly what they did.
And John Wetland was looking at one of the top closers in the game.
Yep.
And we see what happened 2 years later. 96 Yankees, they're world champs, MVP of the World Series, John Wetland.
Right.
So I mean, you had a guy, he proved it overall 2 years later, but you had a guy who would have been money for you if you would have gotten to the postseason.
Right.
And I think that's where, like, another thing, like, I think these guys also showed, because you can make that counter argument. Well, how good would they have been in the postseason, right? Because this would have been the first year of the wild card. Like that rule, like Bud Selig had brought that in there. 95 winds up being it because of the strike, but so the Braves would have been in there for sure in the National League. And then, Cleveland was fighting for that division title, but even if they got the wild card, they're in there, as well. So, and the White Sox were good with Frank Thomas, Ventura, and all that stuff. But so you can look at it, they didn't have any postseason experience really amongst a lot of these guys before. So how good they would have been. But Jose, I think we don't know for a fact, but seeing what a lot of these guys left the next year or two and went on and did in the playoffs, I think they would have been money for the Expos.
Yeah, I agree. Like Moises Alou, a lot of playoff experience later on, but he performed pretty big. He performed for Florida Marlins pretty well. Like, you have Marquise Grissom went to Atlanta, played well in the playoffs for the Braves,
won a World Series.
Yeah. So you have a lot of guys who eventually showed what they can do in those moments. So, and I think you had the manager who was very calm, cool, collected. You never see Felipe Alou, excuse me, overboard, screaming, anything like that, getting thrown out of a game or something like that. He was very calm, and he held that team together. And I think he would have shown also he would have shown what he can do as a manager as well. So yeah, I think they would have been fine, to be honest with you. I think the Braves would have been tough with the Braves, but they were playing the Braves at this point. I think the divisions already were 3 divisions now, so they were playing the Braves a bunch already. Cincinnati was good, but I don't think Cincinnati was going to be that big of of like a deter for them to get to the World Series.
Well, because I think at that point, I feel like it might have been they played maybe 9. I don't know how many times they had played, like, maybe 9 times.
Yeah, I think they were like 5 and
4 against the Braves.
Yeah, something like that.
Which is close.
Yeah.
I know, like, you can't go by the regular season record really once you get to the playoffs with competition, but who do you think would have been their biggest challenge, and how far do you think this team would have gone if the playoffs would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, I mean, the Yankees were right behind them. If they would have gotten to the World Series, but I do think it would have been the Braves. Because again, like in the playoff series, and I know the Braves fell short a lot of times, but if you can throw, Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox won the Cy Young this year, so if you can throw those three guys in a 7-game series, whatever the case may be at that point, that's going to be tough to beat. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you're looking at Pedro, Ken Hill, and what was the guy's name? Fasano, something like that. Jeff Fasaro. I don't know. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I know they were having a really good season, but the playoffs are different, and the Braves obviously at this point have been to a World Series. Like, I mean, I know the team is like starting to shift also, but those three guys, man, that's tough to beat in a playoff series.
Yeah, I kind of wonder. I don't know.
It would have been
I,
a great series, though.
yeah, I don't know. Would they have gotten them in the first round, or would it have been in the LCS? I'm wondering, but
Might have been the LCS because I don't think. I mean, I'm thinking the way it is now, which is harder, kind of like
yeah, because I feel like the Braves would have been the wild card.
right.
I do think the Expos would have held on for the division.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you
Like,
think about it, the Braves in any other division would have been in first place except the AL East. Because the Yankees had like 70 wins, but I think the
yeah,
Braves are like 68 wins or something like
right,
that.
right.
So they were good.
So I do just wonder. But I mean, a big thing is, the Braves win the World Series the next year. Marquise Grissom is on the Braves that year, so you got to look at it like who he was a big factor for that
Absolutely,
team.
yeah,
So then, like 94, you're not having that. I really don't know. Like, but I do think I going into it, I thought, man, that would have been the biggest challenge. But
yeah, yeah,
if let's say they get to the World Series, the Expos, you have the Yankees, which a lot of people now, I read articles about that 94 and they're going with the Yankees, but I don't know if the Yankees would have gotten there that
yeah.
year.
I don't know either because that Chicago was good, and yeah, the Indians were, obviously we all know what the Indians were at that time, and the next season they get to the World Series, so that would have been, a tough. And this isn't like Jeter, like
Mhm.
all those guys. This is a makeshift. I don't want to call it a makeshift, but like it was just a bunch of old dudes on this team. You know what I'm saying? Like, and they get Paul O'Neill this year, I believe it is, and
I think he came the year before.
okay, so yeah, I don't know. Like I know they had a great record, but I wasn't too sold on this Yankees team here.
Yeah. I'm not too sold on them either. I do wonder about that Cleveland team though.
Yeah, no, they were good, and they were just one game back. They finished one game back of the White Sox, and the White Sox had a great year. You know what I mean? So that would have been interesting, because they were a good team, really good team.
I mean, they have, and it's not what we would see in '95 and
Right.
'97, but you still got Kenny Lofton, Vizquel, Carlos Baerga, Albert Bell, Eddie Murray. You got Sandy Alomar, young Manny Ramirez,
Real young at this year, right?
real
He's real
young,
young.
real young. So I do wonder, like, if man, I think Cleveland, like they did the next year, I think that's the team that would have won the American League, not New York. Because, like you said, that young talent that New York got in '95 and in '96
Right.
wasn't there yet. But I do wonder that if Montreal would get, I do think Atlanta would be their toughest.
Yeah. I think the winner of that, probably the winner of the World
Okay,
Series.
so you think either, well,
Yeah.
I think definitely Atlanta gets them with their pitching. So you think Montreal would have gotten Cleveland too?
I think so. Yeah. I think because that would have been another really fun series because I think, we all know what Pedro turned out to be too in the playoffs. You know what I mean? He's like one of the best playoff pitchers. And that watching Pedro against that lineup, because that lineup was already great. You just mentioned all the names. I think it would have been a lot of runs scored though. After Pedro, I know Kenny Hill had a great season, man. But we talked about having to face Maddox, Moats, Glavin. Talk about that lineup, having to face that lineup. You know what I'm saying? 6, 7 times trying to beat that lineup. It's going to be tough. So it would have been a really fun series to watch.
a lot of people look at this and say, if 94 plays out, Montreal still has a baseball team 30 years later. Now, we look at what happened in 95 the next year. Seattle, they were, close to, people were like, oh, save the team, save the Mariners. And they have that, amazing LDS against the Yankees. They wound up going to the LCS and losing to Cleveland. But a lot of people point to that and how exciting that was, and that kept Seattle, Mariners baseball going,
Yeah,
and all those things. But hey, they also got that new stadium, like
right.
Safeco Field came in and all that stuff. Do you think, let's say, hypothetical, the Expos win the division, all those things, they win the LDS, and they get to the Braves and they lose in the LCS. Great season, but they lose. Do you think Montreal, like, baseball is still there? Like, do you think it had to be World Series or bust for them, or would that have been enough for them to keep baseball?
I don't think that would have been enough. Like, and I honestly, I'm not even sure if a World Series title does it too. Like,
Mm.
I think eventually the same thing is going to happen. They just couldn't compete. Like, and
So
you
this,
talk.
so this was inevitable in your
I
opinion.
think I think so.
Okay.
I think so. And obviously, I'm not into like the books and all that stuff, but I don't know what they were bringing in like revenue wise and things like that. But it wasn't what these other teams were bringing in for sure. Like, so I think, in my opinion, I think even if they won the World Series, these guys are still leaving. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if it's like a wholesale like it was in '95, but
Mm-hmm.
these guys are not staying. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're eventually going to go and get more money somewhere else. I mean, at this point in time in baseball, them small market teams were really struggling.
They were.
And again, hence, a lot of that stuff with the strike. Well, why, that was a part of the strike, obviously, and so no, I don't think. I think either way, unless something would have happened, if they win the World Series and they build a stadium for them, I don't know, maybe, but I think inevitably they weren't going to be able to keep all those guys.
No, I think I kind of, we didn't talk about it. I feel the same way. I just feel like there's things that are beyond, because you look at it, and even me getting ready for this episode, I was like, man, why didn't they keep investing in the scouting, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the Expos, traditionally, they kind of did. They had a lot
They
of,
had to.
yeah, that was the only way.
Yeah.
So it's like that was something that they had. Um, the game changed, the game evolved, free agent, like, these years, like, the game did change, but it just shows. And the older I get, always, like, we see some owners in baseball and some you don't, or in all sports. Some you see, they're more public, others you don't hear about as much. But who you have running the ship is just so important. And, something like, you mentioned those documentaries that I think I've seen before too, and I was watching them getting ready for this. That change in ownership, when they went from
Yes.
Charles Bronfman, who helped, he was that one guy, and he did, keep them competing. He did pour into it. He
He poured
showed
into
that.
the scouting too, like that. He
Yes,
he he eventually knew, especially after like, you know, that early team. We talk about Andre Dawson and all them.
Gary Carter and
Right,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
he knew after that. He was like we have to win by developing our own talent. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
he
didn't mean to jump in on
No,
you like
no,
that.
it's true, because he couldn't keep up with the free agency. He
Right.
wanted Reggie Jackson,
Yeah.
and Reggie Jackson went to New York, and Steinbrenner's like, I got New York, I got that. So he knew it. But in '91, he sells the team to this group. It's 12 guy, like a conglomerate. And when do you ever hear, like, there's 12 guys at the top? Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that's not going to work. And when you go to that and you go to 12, not only you have 12 guys, but 12 guys who don't know baseball, they don't know the finances of baseball, you were doomed to fail.
Yeah.
And I think that, to your point, it would have happened anyway, that these Expos were going to go down.
Yeah, I mean, just think, and again, it's hard to keep that much talent anyway, but we talked about it earlier. Like, it's the same thing with like, at the time, like the Florida Marlins, like teams like that, where you're like, man, why do they always get like they always have these young good players, and it's the same thing because they're not going to be able to get free agents. I mean, I don't know how the Marlins can get free agents, but they're not going to pay free agents, so they have to develop their own guys. A lot of these franchises, the A's, obviously, Moneyball and all that, like there's a reason why these teams have to do that stuff, man. And so I think there's no way you're going to be able to keep Larry Walker, or you can't keep Moises Alou. Obviously, they lose Grissom, like paying Pedro, Wetland they lost right after that. So like all this great talent that they had, they're not going to be able to keep it, man. So again, like that's why like teams like Kansas City now, like I look at like some of these great young players they have, and I'm like I feel like they're just grooming them for like the Dodgers, Yankees, Phillies, Red Sox,
And
like
that's with the changes in baseball, like
right with the revenue sharing and all
yeah.
that, and it's they still have a tough time keeping up. So imagine back in '94.
Right, absolutely. No, and I just think people want to point to the strike and they want to necessarily blame, Bud Selig for the Expos not being there. Bud Selig, he's done, to be fair to him, he has some like the wild card, but a lot of negative, but you
Yes.
can't put everything on Bud, and I don't think this is on Bud Selig. I think this is on
No.
the game was changing and the fact that it's huge, man, and I think anybody who's a sport fan probably if you've been around long enough, you've experienced good ownership with teams and bad ownership, and we don't talk about it enough. That's night and day of what makes a difference. Like it really
Yes.
is. Like if you have bad ownership, you're almost if you win, you're doing it like despite the odds. Like it's an anomaly. Like you don't see too many teams who win a lot and like ownership is like awful. Like it doesn't happen. Like and I think that's what the Expos wound up getting awful ownership.
Right, because players talk. You know what I'm saying? Like obviously, and if if I'm telling you, Deremy, like, oh, my job, man, I hate my boss. I hate my boss. He's a terrible boss. You're not going to want to come work at
Right.
my job. Like, you know what I'm saying? I think that's just common sense. So I think a lot of players talk about that stuff. Obviously, agents know all this information. Agents don't want players to go to these teams and things like that. Look at Cincinnati. Cincinnati's having a good season. Terrible ownership at this time. You know what I mean? Like, and a lot of people knew that. So the Yankees for a while
Yeah.
there with Steinbrenner, you know what I'm saying? Like terrible ownership. And even though we all know what George Steinbrenner, was trying to do, but he was spending money, but still, like, he was a rough owner to play for, So like people know this information, and you're not gonna for a franchise that's going to have a tough time getting free agents already, to add that piece to it. Yeah, nobody's going to go there.
No. And I think that's just because I thought about it. I'm like, it's not comparable to the Mariners. The Mariners got to the LCS, and that was enough to keep them.
Right.
I'm like, man, I don't think I'm like definitely if they lose in the LCS, that I don't think that does anything. But I was like, yeah, a World Series appearance doesn't do it. A World Championship is interesting
It's an
if they're like
interesting one,
world
yeah.
champs. That's fascinating to me. But like, I still don't have the confidence. But that's the only thing that may make me reconsider. Is like if they won it all. If they just win the pennant, I still say it's a no for sure.
Yeah, no, again, the World Series piece, it would something drastic would have to happen, for them, and some different type of revenue that's coming in, TV deals, like even all that, like they were struggling with. I don't know. There, I mean, like I know Montreal is a beautiful city. Like I know what that fan base is like in the NHL. I know. I don't know what that's like for baseball or what it was like. I know people were showing up. I know.
Somewhat.
Yeah, somewhat. I remember that last series in '93 when they played the Phillies, excuse me, and that wasn't the last series, it was close to one of the last series, and that place was packed, and what stuck out to me was that it was packed, you know what I mean? Because I
Mm-hmm.
was so used to not seeing it like that. And I'm not sitting here calling Montreal fans not good baseball fans, but I think it leads to a part of why this team left. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I know the ownership played a part in it, but they had a lot of good young talent for at least 4 years here. I don't know how much support they were getting.
I think for attendance in '94, they were definitely in the bottom half. I feel like in the bottom 10 teams.
Yeah,
of attendance, and you're having the best record in baseball.
with a great team, you know.
You're a great and exciting team. A lot of people say because and I've be honest, I've been to Canada once. Like I don't know like these cities very well personally, but a big hit was for a year the Expos came before the Blue Jays, so they had all of Canada, and they had that more rich part with Toronto and that big market. But then when the Blue Jays get established, like almost a decade later, they're wanting that Toronto's theirs. So then Montreal kind of it just went back from being they were Canada's team, so the whole country's watching you, to now you're just this little province team, you're Quebec's team, and that was a big difference, a big hit for him, Jose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you look at that season, like in terms of like the most attendance, whatever, you had the Braves, Orioles with Camden Yards, but that team was pretty good. You got the Red Sox with Fenway, and you got the both Chicago teams, and even teams like Cincinnati was outdrawing them. Florida Marlins was outdrawing them. The
Yeah, the
Expos.
Marlins. That was the year after
Right,
their expansion, and those
right,
Miami for pro sports sucks to this day. They
right,
suck. You
right.
hear that,
Even
Miami? You
those World
suck.
Series teams, even those World Series teams, like they were still like it was tough to sell out. You got teams like Kansas City at the time out. Their attendance was higher than the Expos. So I know you see a lot of these documentaries, all these Expos fans like crying and like, no, we support our team. No, you don't. Like
Yeah,
it's
I
just
think you had a
simple.
cult. You had a cult following. I think there are
Yeah,
some, like you see in those documentaries. There's some of those super fans, but
but
like it
that's everywhere
probably
though.
yeah, like but it's not that. And I think that's the thing. Some of the names you gave, the Orioles at that point, established franchise.
Right.
The Red Sox for sure. The Braves, but they had the whole
Another
superstation.
another suspect fan base.
Yeah, but they had the whole TBS superstation thing.
Right.
The Reds had success, but then when you give me like the Marlins outdrew you in their second year of existing,
Colorado Rockies. Coors
yeah,
Field was not. It was nice, but that's another franchise.
but they're new.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
But guess what? They showed that interest. Denver showed it and still does.
Yep.
So I mean, one thing I didn't think about too, though, was how hard it was if you run because you're in Canada, so you have Canadian dollars, but you have to pay the players American dollars.
Yeah. So
So
there's a
doing that,
difference.
like that, you know, transfer and that calculation, like that's a lot. Like I never really thought about that. If you own like the Blue Jays or like if you own the Expos, like it's there's Canadian money, but then you got to pay them American. So how you do all that, like that's another added layer to this.
Yeah, I hear that a lot with like Maple Leafs fans and
Hmm.
stuff, like how they talk about like free agents and things like that, and that always comes up. So one interesting thing about attendance, and I'll leave it at this: the worst attendance in '94 was the Toronto Blue Jays fans. And just think about it; they're coming off of back-to-back World Series championships, in '92, '93. I don't know. I think it lends to like that's not their sport. You know what I'm saying? Like baseball is just not the most popular sport there, which I totally understand. But
But
it's
what
like
were the '94 Blue Jays? I feel like they weren't.
back to back champs. You gotta
They are.
support.
I no, I'm with you. They were 55 and 60
Right. So they're not a
when the
terrible
season
team.
ended in '94. And I'm with you. I'm not giving an excuse, but I'm just like 'cause I feel like in '90 those World Series years it was booming. Like they had good
Oh,
attendance. I
that
feel.
place was packed. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Then,
Sky Dome. But yeah, yeah, we kind of see that. Like they're not the greatest when it comes to baseball. Toronto isn't either, but that's a big market,
right.
and yet that team is still there.
Yeah.
The Blue Jays have made it, so there is something to it. Um, I kind of wonder though. I'm glad as a nice segue because I kind of wondered it maybe it wouldn't have made any difference at all. But say '94 continues and the Expos win, how do you think fans would have felt like USA fans if 3 years in a row your world champs are teams from Canada?
I'll give you another one. How about '93? They get in, and it's the All Canadian World Series. You know what I mean? Like that.
Oh, if the Expos would have
Right.
gotten in,
If
yeah,
the Expos get in and get to the World Series the way they were playing, and they're playing the blue, like people would have lost their minds, man. You know what I mean?
right?
Like, and it's I was thinking about that earlier. Like, man, they were close. Like they were close to getting to the Phillies. And again, I don't think they would have gotten to the World Series that year, but just hypothetical, that would have been insane to watch two Canadian teams playing the World Series. But even that, say they win in '94, 3 years in a row, man, like that's the good old boys would have had a tough time, with that stuff, man.
Yeah,
But they were developing teams and they were playing really well. Montreal, I mean, the Blue Jays. We did an episode. Check the archives on
check them.
the '93 Blue Jays and that World Series. So they had a great team. I don't think they would have beaten. I don't think the Expos beat the Blue Jays if they would have gotten to the World Series. But that would have been interesting, man. 3 years in a row, a team out of the United States wins the World
Well,
Series.
because I think that, especially back then, even if people didn't openly admit it, I think it would happen now to an extent. But like, there is that nationalism, even though we're all North America. I do think like people look at that. And in the
Right. Oh yeah,
90s,
yeah.
the internet's a new thing in like 94. So like, how many people were watching? I mean, obviously when they came to your town or your city of the Expos and Blue Jays, but were they getting the national game of the week a lot? I don't know. How many people were really watching those teams and like what the ratings would have been for those World Series?
I know.
And I think like, because I don't, you helped me remember with the Blue Jays winning, I didn't see a lot of like Blue Jay gear at that time.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. And they had a diverse team, man. They had Latin players, they had African American players, like, they had a lot. And, even that still, and no, it would have been really, really, really interesting to see that. Because even this year's like to switch it to hockey a little bit, like the big push for the Edmonton Oilers to win the Stanley Cup was what?
Canada hasn't won a cup in
Right.
years.
That's every year. So if that's not a big factor, why does that always come up? Since '93, they haven't won a Stanley Cup, and that always comes up. So I think vice versa would have been the same thing.
I think so. Also, another interesting thing would have been to connect these two, Canadian teams. Cito Gadsden winning World Series 1993, and if you get Felipe Alou, that's back to back, managers of color being World Series winning managers, and
Yeah, it would have been a lot of heads blowing out, and
I think so, and I think so, and I think both are managers who were pretty low key, weren't real
yeah,
excitable.
very
I
classy
just
guys, very
very
classy guy.
classy guys, very classy guys. But I think it just would have been. I want to know who for you. I think he's the guy on that Expo team. It's the skipper whose legacy is affected the most by
Absolutely,
this season not happening.
I agree 100%. I think if he wins this World Series, who knows what happens, in '95 if that team kind of stays together. I think they would have had a lot of pressure to keep this team together. You know what I mean? Like if they would have won it in '94, I think that would have been a difference. We're talking about like keeping the team around. Like maybe they would have stayed a little longer. I don't know financially they were able to do it. I know they were just really financially they were really struggling come '95, and they knew that was coming. But I think if he wins it, man, like and he has another successful year in '95, and he goes to the Giants and all that like later on, but man, like we're definitely talking about Felipe Alou as one of the best managers in the '90s and in that generation for sure. If he wins a World Series,
Yeah, and I do also think I feel like he wasn't a hot commodity as a skipper, but I think if he wins a World Series,
yeah, that changes. Yeah,
I think other teams will be wanting him. Other teams will be going after him too, like because he was more. I feel like a little more outgoing than Cito Gatson was for Toronto,
yes,
but also I think people knew him in the game more. Like people knew him, like to what you said, like coaching those guys in the summer league. He had more of a name to him than what a Cito Gatson did.
yeah, I agree
Um,
with that.
so I feel like he could have been. Who knows? He gets opportunities. Who knows if Joe Torre doesn't get that Yankee job.
Right.
Maybe,
It
Buck
goes to the Mets
Showalter
or
gets it.
something.
Yeah, Buck Showalter gets axed, and they want Felipe Alou. Like
Good
you never
point.
know. So I just think it's interesting, but um,
And I think if he goes to the Yankees, they don't. I don't think they win as many World Series because I think Joe Torre was a big part of that. But they're still very successful with a nice young team with Jeter and all those guys. Yeah.
absolutely. Should this be the thing that is talked about most from the '94 baseball strike?
It's tough, man, because I think those individual seasons that we were seeing, I think Tony Gwynn gets close to 400. You know what I mean? Like he was having an amazing season. You talked about Matt Williams was, and Griffey, and I, I don't know, man. Like I think the aftermath is the biggest story of the baseball strike and how baseball to this day I think it's still affected. I know the game has changed a lot and there's a lot of great teams and in some markets the game is not struggling at all. Like talk about Philadelphia for sure, it's not struggling, not even a little bit. But I think fans have when they left baseball, they never really came back, and then they got older and then these younger kids now are definitely not into baseball. I think that was the biggest impact of the strike for me. I it's tough, man. I think about this often too, Deremy. Like, was it the Expos or what is these individual seasons? And I don't know. I struggle with that. I want to say I would have liked to see this Expo team and what they can do in the playoffs. I think Tony Gwynn was going to continue to have good seasons. Griffey had continued to have good seasons. Like there were some teams that, Frank Thomas won MVP. Like he was going to continue to have good seasons. Greg Maddux won the Cy Young. He was going to continue. Like I do think the worst part of the year '94 was this Expos team.
I would have loved to have seen Tony Gwynn hit 400. I mean,
Yeah,
he's already a Hall of Famer, RIP. Great, known as one of the great hitters ever. But I just think what that does for his legacy if he, breaks that streak and hits 400, I think it grows so much. I kind of wonder what happens to it. I mean, I think steroids were inevitable. They were already in the game at this point.
yeah,
But I mean, if Matt Williams or Griffey breaks Maris's record, and at the rate that he was going, because I know it's August 12th when it stops, and he has 43, and
yeah,
you're like, well, he's like a month and a half almost, like, or a month with some change. Could he have gotten it? And it's like the rate he was going, he could have gotten that. He could have at least gotten to 60 or 61.
yeah.
So
He
what
was.
that does for the home run, like the whole steroid boom, I think is very interesting.
Yeah, imagine Matt Williams being the guy that broke Roger Maris's record. That would have been interesting.
But look at the thing is though, look at like Roger Maris
True,
is not that kind. Besides that thing, like that record, he's not that kind of a.
true.
He was a good player. Don't get me wrong, but he's not that kind of guy.
And what's interesting, it's like what we would have had would have been like similar to like '98, where if it's Griffey and Matt Williams, and like, are we checking Sports Center every?
Mm.
I know Griffey's in the West Coast, so we would have to stay up late, which me and you were already doing. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like would have been that push, the same push, like what I'm saying, like with the Sosa McGuire thing, like that would have been really interesting too to see, man. Like if a young great Griffey and he continues to hit the way he was in, which I feel like he would have. I think Matt Williams would have cooled off eventually, but you never know. You know what I'm saying? Like it would have been them two against each other. He's like one guy, both West Coast guys. Like it would have been really interesting.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't have been as covered the same
Nah,
because
I don't think so.
they weren't doing it in the same. Obviously, we know why. Like if you watch like Matt Williams in '94 and Griffey, it's like, oh wow, it's impressive. Don't get me wrong, it's impressive, but in '98, I mean, it was like they were playing home run derby every night.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
they were just hitting these. It was just crazy how they did it. So I think that's the difference. It was how they looked, but like how they were doing it. It was just like McGuire hit 3 today, he hit 2, and then like he cooled off, and then he gets 10 in like a week. Like it's like what? Like it just was nuts. Like.
yeah. I was watching Long Gone Summer the other night, like
Mm-hmm.
just because I was like, man, like I haven't watched this in a long time, and it's just
And
funny
we
to
did an
me.
episode about that, I think, too.
Yes,
Yeah.
we did. Check the archives for sure. And it's just funny to me when I watch those old highlights. And I know this is like sidetrack, but when I watch Mark McGuire like trot the bases, I'm like, this dude is like ginormous, man.
No, he's huge.
His uniform is like barely fitting him. He's like not even moving. He's like a robot. And I agree. I don't think it's covered as the way that would have been, because also baseball was pushing that
Yes.
because they was, they needed that. I don't think 94 they didn't need that. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I don't know. It would have been fun though for me to watch.
It would have been fun, and I think it would have been interesting. And obviously, yeah, they pushed this to bounce back because, I mean, fans were mad when they
Yeah.
came back in '95. Fans were pissed, and I just think I look at how the way the game. What gets me is the clips that are sad for '94 strike, and I guess this is where the Expos may make a case for me as being the saddest story. Is
That's a good way to
everyone,
put it.
everyone's saying we've had the World Series, we had World Wars, we had this, we had that, and we still had the World Series. And now we can even add years later, we've had pandemics
Yep.
and stuff, and we still had a World Series. But in '94, no World Series. And if you watch how the World Series was, even from '93 and on, like in the past, it still had like a pageantry.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel once it came back, you can kind of see it. That pageantry was gone from the World Series, and we
Yeah.
don't have that anymore. And I think that's what makes me sad. The World Series used to be an event, and from when the strike ended and they came back, it's a big deal if you're a fan and stuff, but it's not an event anymore.
No, it is. Baseball lost a lot. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, and I don't know if we can even like, if we even know the magnitude
Mm-hmm.
of how it affected baseball. Like for us, we were happy that it was back. You know what I'm saying? Because we were just nerds like that and fans like that, and especially like some of us, baseball is still the number one sport. Even though I was mad that they did go on strike and I lost the World Series in this fun season. Even like I was thinking, like the '94 home run derby. The All Star game was in Pittsburgh that year, right?
Correct.
And Frank Thomas hit like a 7,000-foot home run. Like even that was like so much fun to watch, and we lost all of that, but it's just, I don't know, man. When did interleague play start? Was
That came after this.
right, and I think that's a part of why that mystique of the World Series is gone. I was thinking about, I don't know why I was thinking about all of this week, but
It's
I,
so much intertwined with it, with the
right,
Expos and this strike. Yeah. Yeah.
right, and it's just like I remember like not like I think interleague for me is like ruined the All Star game almost. That's what I was thinking about. I was watching the All Star game, and it like ruined the All Star game because
For
it's like
sure.
these guys play each other all the time. Back when we were growing up there, I mean, that wasn't the case. So when you saw these guys, it was like holy shit! Like Pedro's against like Mark McGuire. Like it was like you don't never going to see that. And I think the World Series is suffering because of that too.
Yeah, no, I think great points. All great points you made, man. And I agree. Another awesome point you made was the seismic effect, and I think that's where the Expos kind of lose me as far as like feeling sorry for them, is because I see what happened with this strike, and I think on paper, someone who doesn't know will look at how the revenue deals are still good. Teams are still getting money, players are still getting paid. There's an MLB network and all that stuff. So MLB survived, right? But it's like if you look on paper, that's what you think. But you honestly know, like the lore, the magnitude of it is what's hit, and that's what you need in a sport. You need
Right.
the revenue. You need those analytical numbers that you can point to and touch. But I think you need that lore. You need that, like, wow, what's going to get the common person to the screen to watch you? Okay, common fans were watching the World Series. Common fans do not watch the World Series now,
No.
unless you're going to give me the Red Sox in '04 or the Cubs snapping the streak. People are losing that, and I think that's where I'm like, man, just baseball is gone. They like we've mentioned it on this show before. Pre 1994, Mike Trout is not going to be known. A Mike Trout type of talent will be known. Now
Yeah.
he's not known.
I mean, yeah. Like where baseball is thriving is like these cities where these teams are always competitive. Like again, like for us in Philly, baseball is thriving. You know what I'm saying? Like the Phillies are good. That place, Citizens Bank, is sold out every single game. You know, you go to some of these other cities and, you know, like Phillies were in Pittsburgh. I don't mean keep harping on the Phillies, but they were in Pittsburgh over the weekend, and that was 80% Phillies fans. You know what I mean? Like, and Phillies fans travel well, but I just think it's a part of like Pittsburgh is just like a team, and you know fans are not showing up for that.
But I think that's the case though. What about it with and we kind of said some things Montreal because like yeah Pittsburgh has kind of struggled for a while but yet that's still a big part. They got a new stadium,
Beautiful stadium.
beautiful stadium. Um, they were made a part of it, but you look at Montreal, you look at what's going on with the Oakland A's and how sad that story is, and I see the parallels with the Expos and the
Yep.
A's,
Yep.
and it's just like you look at ownership, but you look at these cities, and that goes with fans, but that also goes with like politics and all that stuff too. Like what goes on here, and how come you're not keeping these teams? Because Pittsburgh has had a lot of losing seasons over these years, in the past 30 years. Philly is hot right now, had a lot of losing seasons in these past 30 years.
Yeah.
Baltimore is doing good now, a lot of losing seasons, but yet those franchises, you're not thinking about them being shipped out. But
No.
what's going on here? Why Montreal? Why an Oakland A's?
And the A's had a great fan base too. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't get that, man, at all. And I was kind of upset because they were in Philly, and I was like, man, I should have went to that game, man, one of those games, just to kind of like, you know, see them one more time in Oakland. But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree, man. Like I agree. I think you know Montreal is not one of those wasn't one of those staple franchises that no matter what fans are going to show up. In Chicago for the Cubs, fans show up. You know what I'm saying? Like I know Wrigley's a big part of that, and maybe that's what they were missing. Like maybe they were missing a place where fans would want to just go. And the thing is, in Montreal Stadium, fans did not want to go to that stadium either. So when you don't have a good product and like because Camden Yards was that, you know, Citizens Bank Park is that. Like, even though the team may not be good, the stadium's so great that you're like, you know what, I'm just going to go enjoy myself a little bit, get some good food or whatever. Like, if you don't have that either, that's tough, man. Like, that's a tough thing to kind of get over.
But and this is where I'm really out of my league here because I'm not a politician. I'm not a dollars and cents guy. Like I understand. I know.
I'd vote for you though, man.
I
If you were,
appreciate that. I
yeah,
appreciate that. You be my running mate.
there you go.
But I don't get it though because we've been lucky enough. Certain cities have been to see that effect and to see the boom of the economy just when you have that, what that does for people wanting to go out to eat,
Yeah,
people, jobs, all these things. Like, that's what I don't get why a city doesn't rally to keep a team, especially once you already have it. You fought to get a team,
right,
which takes a lot to get a team to a city. But why not invest in this? Because, like you said, man, especially even if the team is bad, but then it goes even crazier if the team is winning. But you
right.
have a hot stadium that you sell out all that revenue, jerseys, all that, vendors and all those things.
Parking, like you name it, man.
And then everything in the city's buzzing, but all those restaurants and stuff, the economy booms. Like, I don't get like why Oakland isn't trying to invest in that and what that could have done for the city. I don't understand why Montreal didn't do that and just what that could do for the city. It just confuses me. I don't get it.
Yeah, because I think we talked about the Pirates a little bit ago, and I think that helps them. You know what I mean? Like PNC Park is a beautiful, beautiful park,
Mm-hmm.
but they've been terrible since the early '90s. You know what I mean? Like they had a couple runs there with McCutcheon, but that was it. Like, but people just like to go to that stadium, and it's just and it's restaurants all around it. It's just a beautiful park, man. And I don't get that either. And I know it can cost a lot of money and taxpayer this and that. Like again, just like you, Deremy, like I'm not I'm not
Yeah,
into all of that, but to me it's common sense. Like, if it would help this city. And then not only that, now you're getting all-star games because why? You have a beautiful park. Like, it can add a lot to that. But I don't think what I think you do that if you want to keep the team. You know what I mean? Like inevitably, like if you're a city and you really want to keep this team, you will make those moves. But if you don't really, in Montreal's case, I don't know if Oakland is that the case, but I think in
I
Montreal,
think in Oakland it's definitely not with the fan, like some of the fans, but definitely with like ownership and
right, right,
politicians. They don't want to keep it, in my opinion.
and that Vegas area is it's hot. You know what I mean? And there's now they got hockey. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like they'll have an NBA team there soon. Like it's hot. And they got the Raiders now. It's just I get it.
I just don't. I wish someone could explain it to me because, like I said, it's not easy to get a professional franchise in your city. So
Yeah,
you had to fight and work hard to get it there. Like, it's not like anyone can just, I want a team in this new city. And it's just like, okay, we throw you one. You work hard to get it. Why not build that up and
yeah,
just invest in it? And I think that's why I look at Montreal and the Sonic, these teams, and I go, I feel bad for those legit super fans, but then I kind of go with some of the like where were so many of you? Why did this happen? I look at the Raiders with Oakland. Why did this have to happen? Like it didn't need to happen in my experience, in my opinion, but it's going on, and I can't feel that sorry for you when you have a great team in '94 and you're getting outsold by the Reds in that awful stadium, and we
yeah,
got Barry Larkin.
yeah,
And I like Barry Larkin, but he wasn't exciting in my opinion. Um, like Barry Larkin's it. Like I don't know. Like you're in the
yeah,
bottom 10.
yeah. Marge shots. That big
That
ass
dumb
dog
dog
shit.
shitting on the field. Marge shots a
Yo,
Nazi.
that was
Like
a
come on.
shit show, and they outdrew you.
Yes.
So
Like
imagine
Marge.
imagine Cincinnati having the '94 Expos. Like they'd have probably led the league in attendance. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
I
it.
mean, God, gee, that we would have had more Marge shot. That
I know,
was
I know,
awful.
I know.
Donald Sterling's sister.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty
Like,
much.
ugh.
She might have been worse.
Yeah, honestly, she might have. They're close. It's a running.
Yeah,
Like there's neck and neck. But like you get outdrawn there, you have the best year. So people don't say that. See, that's why I like we do this show because they would have won. Really? You had this great team,
yeah,
and the numbers don't show it. The attendance doesn't show it. Like, what were you
yeah.
going to
It's
wait for the
terrible.
playoffs to show up? Like,
And they would have shown up for the playoffs because the playoffs, like everybody shows up.
it's an
Fans,
event.
right? Fans who are not fans show up to the playoffs just to say you were there. But I, it's again like it's a shame that this I don't want to call them an amazing team, but this crazy talented team, young team. And Cliff Floyd, we don't even talk about him this episode. Like he was an all-star. He was, you know what I mean? Like it's just, and he wins the World Series with the Marlins too.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just, man, like so many great players. And as a fan base, I'm looking at this team. I'm a young Phillies fan, and I'm like, man, like if I would do anything for a team like that, And they had it, and they just let it slip away.
Yeah, and I think one thing that stinks, but when you see Seattle, the Sonics in basketball, and they go to OKC, and guess what? They're booming. Fan
Right,
base is great. The Nationals won a World Series without their best player.
right.
Bryce Harper came here, but like people go to that stadium in Washington. So I mean, it's not helping that like man, like these teams are moving and it's looking like for some of them it was the right
It was the
choice.
right choice. Yeah, I agree.
So, do you think a team should be back in Montreal?
No, no, no.
So
I
you
don't.
don't think they learned their lesson?
No, I don't think so. Like I just think, and this happens too often. Like certain fan bases, like certain cities that really never supported their teams. that don't support their teams as much as other fan bases do. Let's just say, like I'll give you an example. Like I know when they were talking about, I'm gonna like always give you an NHL example, but this past year when they announced the expansion team, Atlanta was one of the finalists. I'm like, what are we doing here? Like this will be the third time that you had a team there. Like, don't you learn your lesson? I get Atlanta's a huge market, but they will not support a hockey team. Like they're not going to do that. They lost 2 teams already, and I'm glad Utah got it, and I think they'll support that team well there. But I just think if a city is showing you what they are, like you better believe them. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if maybe if they get a beautiful facility, a dome stadium, and
In Montreal, you're talking?
yeah, I don't know, but I'm just not sure. I don't think they will come out and support it.
No, I'm not sold on it either. And I think what needs to happen is, and we wouldn't know that, and only time would tell. You got to have a dynamic owner.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, I know all teams need, but I think for something like that to sell me, you really have to have a dynamic owner
yeah,
again.
super creative. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, willing to spend a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like, bring in guys, develop. It'll have to be. He would have to be a great owner.
Mhm. Mhm. So, nah, man, I just think this was interesting, and I think it's we're telling the truth on it, because we'll probably see a lot, August, about
Yeah,
30 years articles and stuff about the baseball strike and the effects, and there's truth to it, that what it did for the 94 Expos, obviously it ended that season. They had the best record in baseball, but I do think it's misleading to say that if that season would have continued, that baseball would still be in Montreal. And I think people don't want to admit that, but it's the truth. Baseball would not be there.
yeah. So I'm glad we were able to come out here and let everyone know. We opened up some old wounds today, Deremy, but it had to be done.
I think it's the truth. I think we say we connect the past to the present, but it's happening with the A's. And how sad that is, and we saw like the boycotts with the fan bases and stuff like that. And you know what, let's be real, we've seen it in all these sports. It's going to happen again with these a team that we're like, oh, they don't, like, it's not
Yeah,
like Atlanta in hockey where it's like they're not established as part of the city, but it's going to be some team where like, oh, they're so a part of that city, how can they move? This is how, like, if you don't watch it, it can happen to anybody. That's why I'm
look at
starting to
Cleveland.
respect.
Ask Cleveland.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of grateful in Philly. Like, we have our four, because, like, man, like, if any of the four just move, like, that would be a crusher to me and a lot of people. Like, a part of the city would be different. So,
Absolutely.
it's good lessons here to talk about it and what we need to do differently as fan bases and as cities to keep that franchise.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and there's not a lot to do. We just got to show up, and I know it's expensive, and I get it, and I get jerseys and all that are expensive, and I'm not telling you to go run out and buy jerseys and all that stuff, but enjoy what you have. You know what I mean? Because there's some cities that, again, Cleveland Browns, them people showed up. You know what I'm saying? Like, and still lost the team, and I would be devastated if that happened to me. You know what I mean? Like, it's extremely devastating. It would change how I look at sports, I think, if that would have happened to me.
oh yeah,
You know what I'm saying? Like, and I don't know, but I'm just glad I live in a city that has great ownership. You know what I mean? Like, I think Sixers ownership is suspect to me, but it's either way, they trying to win. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I know there's a lot of cities that have that too, but unfortunately for our episode today, they did not have that.
yeah, and we're obviously from Philly, but we're not just a Philly show. And I think a lot of people, and I'm not saying you can't critique ownership in your city and there's not things that can complain, but if you have a team, and especially a team that's been there for a while, be grateful that it's still there. Like, be grateful that you still have a team to be upset about.
Right. Right.
Like, so it's important. Jose, it was good. We had our summer break and talk about 94 Expos. We got a lot of good stuff coming.
Yeah.
We have a wrestling, preview in SummerSlam and talking about the state of the WWE. Like, that's coming up. We have episodes on our YouTube channel, looking at remembering Pat Williams. And we also have, some more baseball, possibly a Ricky Henderson episode.
Yeah, maybe some Pete Rose. I don't know. Got a new
Yeah.
documentary coming out, so there might be some stuff on YouTube on how we feel about this documentary. So we got a lot of stuff going on, man.
Yeah, man. So we had a nice July, to get recharged, regroup, but we're here to give you guys a lot more content. So please like, subscribe, tell your friend, word of mouth, wherever you listen to podcasts. And also please go on YouTube, find our YouTube channel, like, subscribe. Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose, our YouTube channel as well. We're going to be giving you guys some more great new content. But for the hardest working man in show business, Mr. Jose Ruiz, I'm Deremy Dove. Thank you guys for listening to Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose.
Peace.